Thank you, John. Over to you, sir.
Okay, right. Thanks, comrades, and thanks for the invite. Um, I should say at the outset, if comrades haven't already read it, we did publish an editorial on the Left Horizons website. I think on Friday, I can't remember now. But subsequent to that, a day or two later, there was also an article written by Michael Roberts, which covered some of the same ground, but in more depth as well. And I would recommend comrades to read them if they haven't already read them to get some background to the election. Now, on Wednesday morning, like a lot of people, I woke up to the result. I'm not one of those people that stays up all night. I woke up to the result. And I felt like a lot of people on the left, I felt seriously disappointed, to a certain extent dismayed that so many people would vote for Trump, especially given that the opinion polls seem to put the election campaign on a bit of a knife edge. And I think, you wouldn't be normal. You wouldn't be a normal person. You wouldn't be a normal socialist on the left if you didn't feel that kind of disappointment and dismay on Wednesday morning. But I think the most important thing that we have to do is not simply to cry in our beer and complain about the result, and there's enough of that goes on anyway, weeping and wailing. That's not our job. Our most important job is to discuss how it could happen and what the likelihood is that Trump would carry out his agenda and what's likely to happen. It's important for us because, of course, Trump is a right-wing populist, not that much different to similar populists in the political sphere in Europe. The popular press here talks about Trump having a sweeping victory. And in one sense, he did. And in almost every voting area in the counties in which votes are counted, the Trump vote went up. In almost every state, the vote for Trump went up. But behind that sweeping victory, there lies a slightly different story. The fact is that Trump's vote went down compared to the campaign in 2020. The reason why Trump did so well, it's quite clear now. It's because the Democrats lost something like 12 or 13 million votes. When we published the editorial, it was 13 million. The count since then may have changed the figure, but it's a massive number of votes. And that's the reason why Trump won. The Democratic campaign actually spent more money than Trump, and yet it was less successful. And the reason is that although Wall Street is kind of moving ahead at the moment, and technically speaking, the American economy is growing, from the point of view of ordinary American workers and American families, living standards are standing still. And they have done for 4 years. And every single one of Trump's rallies, and every single one, he asked the question, are you better off or worse off than you were 4 years ago? And most workers are actually worse off, far worse off. And the Democrats didn't kind of cotton on to that. Or if they did, they tried to pretend it wasn't the case. The basic fundamental class question, it was partly lost on identity politics because Kamala Harris was going for the black vote, she was going for the Latino vote, she was going for the votes of women, and to a certain extent in that last category she succeeded, but to a far lesser extent than anticipated. But the basic class question of living standards wasn't addressed. It was never addressed. And the real winner in this election wasn't Trump or Harris. It was if you like, the none of the above, because around 100 million Americans didn't vote. A big majority of them were completely turned off, not only by Trump, a man without any kind of moral or ethical or code whatsoever, a lying, tax dodging misogynist, and they're completely turned off by them. But they weren't in the slightest bit motivated by what Kamala Harris was offering. Not only that, but it's difficult to say at this stage, so early after the election. It's quite clear that a number of voters consciously abstained from voting Democrat, people who you might think would be the natural constituency of support for Democrats, didn't vote for the Democrats. And one of the key reasons for that, apart from living standards, was the fact that Joe Biden has supported uncritically the Israeli government in its genocidal war against the people of Gaza. I made a mistake in the editorial, by the way. I need to correct it. The United Nations said that of the 45,000 people killed, 70% of them were women and children. I think I quoted the wrong figure in the editorial. We'll have to correct that. But 70% of the people killed. And Joe Biden has armed Israel to the teeth. And certainly it's difficult to say at this stage, it's difficult to say yet how many votes were lost on account of that. But almost certainly large numbers of Muslim and Arab American votes and young people would have abstained from the Democratic Party over that. So it wasn't so much a victory for Trump, although of course it was. And he has a sweeping victory. He has control of the Senate, not only the presidency, but the Senate. I think they've got control of the House of Representatives, the lower house of Congress. And of course, the right wing control the Supreme Court, which overturned the rights of women to a legal abortion. So although he's had a sweeping victory, the real victors are those who didn't vote at all, if you like. They were by far the biggest number. Now, what we've got to kind of look at in a kind of sober ways, it's difficult to anticipate in detail what's going to happen, but we know that behind Trump, not so much behind Trump because the man's barely literate, but the people who support Trump, the right-wing ideologues who support Trump, they have an agenda called, I think it's Project 2025, with all kinds of right-wing proposals dealing with the removal of rights for women, particularly abortion rights, the removal of rights for trans people, the abolition of any kind of regulations on green policies, and of course, no small thing, big tax cuts for the rich. We should say, by the way, again, this was mentioned in the editorial, that although the big majority, opinion polls have shown consistently for a long time now, the big majority of Americans support the right of women to an abortion. But that hasn't stopped certain states from implementing really draconian laws against abortion. In one state, I can't remember where it was now, the women are not entitled to a termination beyond 6 weeks. And many women don't even know they're pregnant until the 6th or 7th or 8th week of pregnancy, sometimes later. And the same, a lot of women are fleeing from one state to another to try to get a legal abortion. In some states, it's still legal. And those states where it's still legal are having to pass their own state laws to make it illegal to extradite people back to their home state so they can be prosecuted. Draconian laws have been introduced against trans people, so they also form a kind of an internal refugee system where people are fleeing from one state to another because of the removal of their rights. So this is the Trump agenda. We know that as far as the war in Gaza is concerned, it's not likely that Trump's victory will make a difference. It's possible, but it doesn't look likely because Trump in the past has been an avid supporter of Israel. It was Trump, for instance, who moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, one of, I think, the first major state to do that. But when you consider how much support in terms of armaments Joe Biden has been given to Israel, there's not very much that Trump could do that would top that, to be honest. It wouldn't be very much different. It's possible that if the war in the Middle East gets more fierce, it's possible. For instance, if American troops are attacked in Iraq, or in Syria. The Americans, against the wishes of the Syrian government, still have a military base in southern Syria. If American bases are attacked, for instance, and American soldiers become casualties in large numbers, something like that, because of the public pressure, that may force Trump along a different path. Trump, above all else, is a narcissist. He will not accept anyone being more important than him. And up to now, Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, has been the tail that's wagged the dog. Bill Clinton famously said when he was president, after he'd had a meeting with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu, in his usual arrogant way, was laying down the law, Bill Clinton said after the meeting, excuse the French, he said, "Who the fuck is the superpower here?" And up to now, it's quite clear that the tail has wagged the dog. Now that may not be possible under Trump, not to the same extent, particularly if there's a wider war in the Middle East and it involves American casualties. The public pressure may force Trump in a direction that even Biden didn't want to follow. It's quite possible also that Trump's foreign policy will change in relation to the Ukraine. Trump is a great admirer of Putin, as we know, and Putin has already made noises and suggestions that the Russian government is prepared to negotiate. So it may be possible that Trump may push the Ukrainian government into some kind of unsatisfactory deal, whereby, for instance, Russia retains the area of the Ukraine, which it's conquered, the Crimea and eastern Ukraine, in return for some kind of guarantees of peace. Now, it's an unsatisfactory state of affairs, particularly from the point of view of Ukrainian workers. But nevertheless, that's an important shift that could happen over the coming couple of years. But as far as internal American politics are concerned, it's almost certain now Trump's got full legislative and presidential power, executive powers to do it, that there'll be big tax cuts. None of these tax cuts, at least the big majority of the tax cuts, will completely bypass workers. Workers won't be better off as a result of these tax cuts. It's also possible in a relatively short time that Trump would introduce tariffs. He said he's going to do this. He's going to introduce, I think he said 20% tariffs generally across the board, and much higher tariffs, 2 or 3 times that, on goods imported from China. And inevitably, that will mean reprisals from the point of view of European governments. Now, what that will mean is it will mean a decline in trade. Well, first of all, the people who pay for the tariffs will be American workers. Because cheap goods which are coming in now from China, which they can't afford, cheap TV sets, cheap phones, a variety of other things, will no longer be available. So all of those kind of goods and white goods, the price of them will go through the roof. Any goods imported from Europe will also go up in price. So it'll be American workers through inflation who will pay for tariffs, whatever extra income the government happens to get. But it's inevitable that there will be reprisals, that the European governments will put tariffs on American exports. The Chinese government might do the same. And that will lead, or could lead, to the possibility of a recession, not only in North America, but also a recession in Europe. So all of those kind of things are possible as a result of Trump's policies. Now, Trump has often referred to the deep state undermining his previous administration from 2016 to 2020. And I don't think this new administration will be exactly the same as it was then. I think what Trump and his supporters will do, it's not so much Trump, as I say, he's not the brains behind the operation, but his supporters, the people in his cabinet, what they will try to do is put their own people into appointed positions as judges, as the heads of important organizations, like the heads of the military, the head of the FBI, the head of the CIA, and all of these things. They'll try to put their people into all of these positions, as many as possible, to try to minimize any kind of fight back. But I think it's important to make the point that that will be a lot more difficult than Trump anticipates. Because, you know, if you add up all of the qualified people, as it were, who could be put in important positions in the state machine, in the FBI, in the police, in the military, in the CIA, if you add up all of the people who would be qualified to do that, it's still really on a small number compared to the kind of huge mammoth state machine that exists. Somebody pointed out in an article the other day that you would get the wrong impression if you got the impression that Trump had appointed lots and lots of judges. I think it's only 1 in 8 judges across the whole country were appointed during Trump's last administration. So I would venture to suggest, and this is open for discussion, of course, that Trump will find a lot more opposition than he anticipated. It's true that his team and his supporters will be more prepared than they were in 2016. But so also will those in the state machine who will anticipate what's going to happen. So I don't think it will be easy for Trump to kind of manipulate and interfere with and take over different sections of the state and the judiciary and things like this in the way that they expect. And what's likely to happen in the next couple of years is that there will be an ongoing guerrilla war through the courts at the state level and also at federal level over all of the measures that Trump tries to introduce. There will also be a breakdown in relations between some states and the federal government. And again, that will go through the courts, it will go through the state courts, it will go through the Supreme Court. It will take months and months and months. And bear in mind that Trump probably only has 2 years to do this, because there are midterm elections in November 2026, and last time there were midterm elections, against all the odds, Trump's supporters actually lost a lot of the elections. That's why the Democrats took over control of the Senate, for instance, in 2022. So Trump probably only has 2 years, because the key issue here isn't so much the guerrilla war that's going to take place in the courts at state and federal level. The key issue here is the resistance that will develop within the working class, because workers will not be better off under Trump. And even in a couple of years, they'll be worse off than they were before. There are already signs of opposition. It's true, it's not kind of on a big scale. There's signs of opposition. I saw on social media today, probably comrades have seen it, that among women distributing blue bracelets as an indication of the fact that they didn't support Trump and so on. And it's a kind of a minor thing, but it's an indication, it's a straw in the wind of the kind of opposition that will develop. When Trump was first elected in 2017, in a very short space of time, as far as I remember, there were big demonstrations, particularly of women over women's rights. And I think that kind of thing will happen again more and more. And there will be a fight back. There'll be a fight back among trade unionists. It's been noticeable that in the last couple of years, there's been a big increase in the number of workplaces that have filed for union recognition. They've got a different system in America. So, for instance, if a group of workers in a workplace want to get union recognition, then they have to officially file that with the state, and the state will organise a ballot of workers. And sometimes the trade unions have won the ballots, and sometimes they've lost the ballots. But the number of ballots that are actually taking place, recognition ballots, has actually increased dramatically over the last couple of years, and I expect that will continue. Workers will fight back in terms of the living standards, as we've seen recently with workers in car plants, with dock workers, with workers at Boeing, and so on. So that will happen. So expect fireworks. Expect big movements. Expect big struggles. There might be big opposition movements in different communities, in the Black community and in the Hispanic community, especially if Trump tries to introduce, as he's promised to do, a kind some system of expelling illegal immigrants. Now, Trump has promised that he's going to expel, I think, 10 or 11 million illegal immigrants, but it's worth, again, it's not a small thing. The fact is there is no apparatus, there is no statewide or federally based organization that's capable of rounding up 11 million illegal migrants or undocumented workers, as they would call them. It doesn't exist. And if you get a situation where workers or where workplaces are being raided, where communities are being raided by the police to look for undocumented workers, then there could very well be big fight backs, possibly riots in some cities and things like that. So it's that kind of turmoil, demonstrations and movements like that. It's that kind of turmoil that we can expect over the next few years. And part of that movement will be, if you like, a political fight back. I don't know what's going to happen inside the Democratic Party, by the way, because the curse, if you want to put it that way, of American workers is, or the curse for American workers is the fact that they don't have a party of labour. They don't have a party based upon the trade unions. Both of the major parties are wedded one way or another to a certain different degree to Wall Street, to big business, to the billionaires. That's been the case in this election and for a long time. That's one of the reasons why 100 million Americans don't vote at all. But it's possible that there may be enough turmoil inside the Democratic Party for things like that, something like that to begin to change. Remember, the Democratic Socialists of America, it's not a left-wing organization, but it's an organization that calls itself socialist. It's far from what we would describe as a socialist organization. But it was an important vehicle for the development of a left inside the Democratic Party. Remember, it grew in a few years from being just a few thousand to something like 60,000. Now, the Democratic Party is already in turmoil. It's in turmoil now. At the top, they're fighting like rats in a sack because they're blaming, understandably so, they're blaming Biden for hanging on for too long. They're blaming his supporters for persuading him to hang on for too long. And there's a post-mortem going on, a very loud post-mortem going on inside the Democratic Party. And it's possible within that there may be possibly splits towards the left, towards the trade union movement, and so on. We'll see. It's too early to say. It's only a few days since the election, but those kind of things could happen. It's important that we discuss this. And I'm going to finish on this point. It's important that we discuss this because what's happening in the United States could well be repeated, obviously in a different format and a different, with a different look to it. It could well be repeated in Britain or in France or elsewhere. We've already seen in Austria in the last few weeks the far-right party becoming the biggest party. The Reform UK got 4 million votes in this country, and Marine Le Pen's National Front Party, as was, they've changed their name since then, but that far-right party is one of the biggest parties, and it's possible that Marine Le Pen could win a presidential election. It's possible that by the time of the next general election, particularly with the way Starmer is going, it's possible that Reform UK could double or treble the votes that they've got from before. And it's important that we discuss this because what we're seeing at the present time are swings, sharp swings from left to right and right to left and back again. Capitalism is in a crisis. Capitalism cannot provide for workers the basic necessities of life, of a reasonable living standard, of an education system for their children, to provide a roof over their head, and for all the basic necessities of life, a health system that works. Capitalism can't do that. And many workers are kind of looking around, searching, looking around to try to find the answer to this. Now, it's a little bit like if you talk to somebody who thought, well, I know a miracle cure, and even if you can't persuade them that the miracle cure is wrong, sometimes you have to let them try the miracle cure, and then when it doesn't work, then perhaps they'll understand that this miracle cure didn't work and it was fake. It was never going to work. Now, to a certain extent, it's possible that workers may try out Trump. They'll try out people like Nigel Farage. They'll try out people like Marine Le Pen and find them wanting and then move back to the left again. I had an interesting discussion in a meeting a few days ago where somebody was telling me that they were talking to somebody who was a supporter of Nigel Farage, a supporter of Reform UK. And this person had previously been a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. So in other words, they'd supported the radical policies of the Labour manifestos of 2017 and 2019. And when they were stymied, they swung in the opposite direction. And we've never taken the view, Left Horizons, that the 4 million workers who vote for 4 million voters who vote for Reform UK are far-right fascists. They're not far-right. The people who attacked the hotels hosting migrants, they were far-right. They were hooligans, and we were right to judge them in that way. But you can't say that about 4 million people who voted for Reform UK. The people who are disappointed in what the Labour government's done, the people who are searching for an answer to the difficult situation they find themselves in. And they fear growing competition for housing because so much housing is unaffordable. They fear the competition for low-paid jobs. They fear that kind of competition, and that's the reason why it's easy or relatively easy for some demagogue like Nigel Farage to blame migrants for their problems. And that's what happened in the United States. It's ironic that the Hispanic vote in the United States went more to Trump than it did to the Democrats, despite all of the kind of slurs that Donald Trump threw at Hispanic-speaking Americans. You know, about Costa Rica being an island of shit and things like this. But I heard a guy interviewed on the radio, and this guy was speaking and explaining why he voted Trump, and he's speaking with a heavy accent, as you'd expect in somebody who was a Spanish speaker. And this guy was clearly afraid of the competition for jobs. So many Americans these days have to have two jobs. They have a regular 9 to 5 job or a daytime job, and they have to have an additional weekend or evening job just to make ends meet. And it's in those kind of jobs, it's in that kind of fringe area of the economy, in gig jobs and part-time jobs and temporary jobs. It's in that kind of area where there actually will be competition and pressure from migrant workers who are trying to make a living somewhere. So when 4 million people vote for Reform UK, or nearly 80 million people vote for Trump in the United States, it's not a sign that all of these voters are far right. It's a sign of real dread, real fear that the insecurities and the uncertainties of everyday life for them are going to be made far, far worse. We know what the answer is. The answer is socialist policies. In the United States, it's a public health system, properly paid and free at the point of use. It's public ownership of these big monopolies. It's public ownership of the industries that decide on investment and green policies and things like this. It's public ownership and workers' democracy, workers' control of industry and workers' control of society. We would argue for those things. But if they aren't being put forward by the Labour movement, by the trade union movement, and certainly not by the Democratic Party, then workers will thrash around desperately searching for some kind of answer. Trump is not the answer, and it's going to take them the next few years to realise that. But in the meantime, what we'll see in the United States is much more sharper, more intense struggles on all kinds of issues, on women's rights, on workers' rights, on trans rights, on basic rights, on living standards and things like that. And it's part and parcel. It's part and parcel of the political period in which we live. I've often said, and we've often written on Left Horizons, that we live in the most disturbed period of human history. But that is a reality. It's not just words. We can say the words and it sounds very glib, but that is the reality. We're in a period of the decline and disintegration of capitalism, and that will bring in its train all kinds of horrors, all kinds of difficulties, all kinds of upheavals and turmoil. And the election of Donald Trump is one signal that we are entering that kind of political period. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. Excellent as ever. I'm going to end the recording now.